Greetings and welcome back to the Room 303 and Sophomore English. I'm with you in your hymnals, Unit number 2, page 231, the C.J. Cherryh text, The Threads of Time. We are now going to do a little bit of independent practice. We did this obviously in Unit 1 as well, as we're getting ready to read short fiction in the second unit. C.J. Cherryh is known for her space opera series, books filled with romantic adventure. I'm just reading with you, top of page 231. Vivid details of alien cultures, interstellar conflict. She enjoys excitement in her real life on Earth as well. Her adventures include outrunning a dog pack in Thebes, Greece, falling down a chute in a cave on Crete. Referring to her home in the Pacific Northwest, Cherryh says, I choose to live downwind of 5 active volcanoes. In the following science fiction story, so write this down at level 2B, this is a science fiction text. Cherryh depicts the perils faced by the Qual, a human-like race, when they discover a way to travel through time. Cherryh says that, quote, it's human to wish to relive yesterday or to leap ahead to a longed-for event, end quote. Science fiction allows you to fulfill that wish. The Threads of Time is our title, and now we're just going to work through this with our reader. And notice and in the boxes on page 231, 13 has a question mark at the end. Box 14 has a question mark at the end. Do you see it? You'll want to make sure that you answer each one of these as you are doing your own independent practice to focus specifically on different elements of short fiction. Here we go, The Threads of Time. Let's go ahead and just enjoy the reading and see how well you do.
The Threads of Time by C.J. Cherryh. It was possible that the gates were killing the Khal. They were everywhere, on every world, had been a fact of life for 5,000 years, and linked the whole net of Khalar civilization into one present-tense coherency. They had not, to be sure, invented the gates. Chance gave them that gift on a dead world of their own sun. One gate stood, made by unknown hands. And the Khal made others, imitating what they found. The gates were instantaneous transfer, not alone from place to place, but because of the motion of worlds and suns and the traveling galaxies involving time. There was an end of time. Ah, Khal could venture anything. If one supposed, if one believed, if one were very sure, one could step through a gate to a gate that might exist on some other distant world. And if one were wrong? If it did not exist? If it never had? Time warped in the gate passage. One could step across light years unaged, so it was possible to outrace light and time. Did one not want to die bound to a single lifespan? Go forward, see the future, visit the world, worlds to come.
All right, let's pause, write it down at level 1. We've got a situation where we've got an ability in the story to go forward or backwards in time, which is an interesting question. If the door at the back of the room that leads into the enclave of the book room, if that door could be opened and the minute you stepped through it, you went to the place somewhere in your past, or when the door was shut, somewhere in your future, right? To what degree would you want to do something like that? How would that change you? How would that change the world? Now, of course, we're messing here with science fiction, so we're kind of playing a game of the impossible, right, as probable. We're thinking about something that's obviously impossible, at least at this point in the history of our world, and yet probable because of the way it's presented, all right? So the obvious question is, what would you do? Good idea, bad idea. Here we go.
But never go back, never tamper, never alter the past. There was an end of time. It was the place where Khal gathered, who had been farthest and lost their courage for traveling on. It was the point beyond which no one had courage, where descendants shared the world with living ancestors in greater and greater numbers, the jaded, the restless, who reached this age and felt their will erode away.
Page 232.
It was the place where hope ended. Oh, a few went farther, and the age saw them. No more. They were gone. They did not return. They went beyond, whispered those who had lost their courage. They went out a gate and found nothing there. they died. Or was it death, to travel without end? And what was death? And was the universe finite at all? Some went and vanished, and the age knew nothing more of them. Those who were left were in agony, of desire to go, of fear to go farther, of changes. This age did change. It rippled with possibilities, memories deceived. One remembered or remembered that one had remembered, and the fact grew strange and dim, contradicting what obviously was. People remembered things that never had been true. And one must never go back to see. Back-timing had direst possibilities. It made paradox. But some tried, seeking a time as close to their original exit point as possible. Some came too close and involved themselves in time loops, a particularly distressing kind of accident, and unfortunate equally for those involved as bystanders. Among Kaal, between the finding of the first gate and the end of time, a new kind of specialist evolved. Time menders, who in most extreme cases of disturbance, policed the gates and carefully researched afflicted areas. They alone were licensed to violate the back-time barrier, passing back and forth under strict non-involvement regulations, exchanging intelligence only with each other to minutely adjust reality. Evolved. Agents recruited other agents at need, but at whose instance? There might be some who knew. It might have come from the far end of time, in that last, or was it last, age beyond which nothing seemed certain, when the years since the first gate were more than 5,000, and the now, in which all gates existed, was very distant. Or it might have come from those who had found the gate, overseeing their invention. Someone knew, some when, somewhere along the course of the stars, toward the end of time.
233.
But no one said. It was hazardous business, this time mending, in all senses. Precisely what was done was something virtually unknowable after it was done. For alterations in the past produced, one believed, changes in future reality. Whole time fields, whose events could be wiped and redone, with effects which widened the farther down the timeline they proceeded. Detection of time tampering was almost impossible. A stranger wanted something to eat a long time ago. He shot himself his dinner. A small creature was not where it had been when it had been. A predator missed a meal and took another, likewise small. A child lost a pet and found another. And a friend she would not have had. She was happier for it. She met many people she had never, would never meet. A man in a different age had breakfast in a house on a hill. Agent Har had acquired a sense about disruptions, a kind of extrasensory queasiness about a just completed time warp. He was not alone in this, but the time menders, Har knew 3 others of his own age, never reported such experiences outside their own special group. Such reports would have been meaningless to his own time, involving a past which, as a result of the warp, was neither real nor valid nor perceptible to those in time present. Some time menders would reach the verge of insanity because of this. This was future fact. Har knew this. He had been there. And he refused to go again to now, that now to which time had advanced since the discovery of the gate, let alone to the end of time, which was the farthest that anyone imagined. He was one of a few, a very few, licensed to do so, but he refused. He lived scattered lives in ages to come, and remembered the future with increasing melancholy. He had visited the end of time, and left it in the most profound despair. He had seen what was there, and when he had contemplated going beyond, that most natural step out the gate which stood and beckoned, he fled. He had never run from anything but that. It remained a recollection of shame at his fear.
234.
A sense of limit which he had never had before. And this in itself was terrible to a man who had thought time infinite and himself immortal. In his own present of 10:03 since the first gate, Har had breakfast, a quiet meal. The children were off to the beach. His wife shared tea with him and thought it would be a fine morning. "Yes," he said. "Shall we take the boat out? We can fish a little, take the sun." "Marvelous," she said. Her gray eyes shone. He loved her, for herself, for her patience. He caught her hand on the crystal table, held slender fingers, not speaking his thoughts, which were far too somber for the morning. They spent their mornings and their days together. He came back to her time after shifting time. He might be gone a month and home a week and gone 2 months next time. He never dared cut it too close. They lost a great deal of each other's lives, and so much he could not share with her. "The island," he said. "Marine. I'd like to see it again." "I'll pack," she said, and went away. He came back to her, never aged, and she bore their 2 sons, and reared them, and managed the accounts, and explained his absences to relatives and the world. "He travels," she would say, with that right amount of secrecy that protected secrets. And even to her he could never confide what he knew. "I trust you," she would say, knowing what he was, but never what he did. He let her go. She went off to the hall and out the door. He imagined happy faces, holiday, the boys making haste to run the boat out and put on the bright-colored sail. She would keep them busy carrying this and that, fetching food and clothes. Things happened in shortest order when Marine set her hand to them. He wanted that, wanted the familiar, the orderly, the homely. He was, if he let his mind dwell on things, afraid. He had the notion never to leave again. He had been to the now most recently, 5045, and his flesh crawled at the memory. There was recklessness there was disquiet. The now had traveled 2 decades and more since he had first begun, and he felt it more and more. The whole decade of the 5040s had a queasiness about it. Ripples of instability, as if the whole fabric of the now were shifting like a kaleidoscope.
235.
And it headed for the end of time. It had become more and more like that age, confirming it by its very collapse. People had illusions in the now. They perceived what had not been true. And yet it was when he came home. It had grown to be so while he was gone. A university stood in Morarir, which he did not remember. A hedge of trees grew where a building had been in Morarir. A man was in the council who had died. He would not go back to now. He had resolved that this morning. He had children, begotten before his first time traveling. He had so very much to keep him, this place, this home, this stability. He was very well to do. He had invested well, his own small tampering. He had no lack, no need. He was mad to go on and on. He was done. But a light distracted him. An opal shimmering beyond his breakfast nook. Arrival in that receptor which his fine home afforded, linked to the master gate at Pivrin. A young man materialized there, opal and light, and then solidity. A distraught young man. Hard, the youth said, disregarding the decencies of meeting, and strode forward unasked. Har, is everything all right here? Har arose from the crystal table even before the shimmer died, beset by that old queasiness of things out of joint. This was Alhir, from 390 since the gate, an experienced man in the force. He had used a master key to come here, had such access being what he was. Alhir, Har said, perplexed. What's wrong? You don't know. Alhir came as far as the door. A cup of tea, Har said. Alhir had been here before. They were friends. There were oases along the course of suns, friendly years, places where houses served as rest stops. In this, too, Myrine was patient. I've got to tell you. No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. I'm through. I've made up my mind. You can carry that where you're going. But if you want the breakfast, there's been an accident. I don't want to hear. He got past us. I don't want to know.
236.
He walked over to the cupboard, took another cup. Marine's with the boys down at the beach. You just caught us. He set the cup down and poured the tea where Marine had sat. Won't you? You're always welcome here. Marine has no idea what you are. My young friend, she calls you. She doesn't know. Or she suspects. She'd never say. Sit down. Alhir had strayed aside where a display case sat along the wall, a lighted case of mementos, of treasures, of crystal. Har, there was a potsherd here. No, Har said, less and less comfortable. Just the glasses, I'm quite sure. Har, it was very old. No, he said, I promised Marine and the boys. I mean it, I'm through, I don't want to know. It came from Silent, from the digs at the first gate, Har. It was a very valuable piece. You valued it very highly. You don't remember? No, Har said, feeling fear thick about him like a change in atmosphere. I don't know of such a piece. I never had such a thing. Check your memory, Alhir. It was from the ruins by the first gate, don't you understand? And then Alhir did not exist. Har blinked, remembered pouring a cup of tea, but he was sitting in the chair, his breakfast before him. He poured the tea and drank. He was sitting on rock, amid the grasses blowing gently in the wind, on a cliff top by the sea. He was standing there. Marine, he said, in the first chill touch of fear. But that memory faded. He had never had a wife nor children. He forgot the house as well. Trees grew and faded. Rocks moved at random. The time menders were, in most instances, the only ones who survived even a little while. Wrenched loose from time, and with lives rooted in many parts of it, they felt it first and lived it longest, and not a few were trapped in back time and did not die, but survived the horror of it, and begot children who further confounded the timeline.
Now this is an interesting story. We won't go into a lot of detail, but just an introduction to this genre that we know of as science fiction. At level 1, let's just write down really quickly. This is a story about losses and the recognition of losses, obviously, right? That is to say, what does it mean to commit acts that have repercussions down the line that you cannot undo? Especially if you had the opportunity to travel through time going backwards and forwards. Of course, at 2A, the questions abound in possible themes here. One of them has to do with that notion of technological power, right? We will see a number of apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic kinds of texts. By the Waters of Babylon, we studied the text Anthem in our freshman year. That notion that you build these stories around a future where certain choices made today affect that future way in the future and the ways in which things are lost that cannot be recovered. Of course, we also have this notion of what does death actually mean and what is death? And if you could overcome death, what would that be for you? And how would that feel for you? At level 2B, Obviously here we've got conflict of a number of kinds. We've got symbolism as well as characterization development. All of those things that you're going to work with when you answer these boxes, these colored boxes throughout this story, right? At 3A, what is for you your favorite science fiction text? What is for you your favorite post-apocalyptic critique text? Some will call it The Giver. Some will reference certain kinds of shows, maybe, that are set way out into the future and a world that's somehow similar to the world we live in, but quite different as well. For example, people have said that if somebody from the 1600s were to arrive today in any town in our world, the first thing that they would be blown away by would be the noise. Because 1600, there's not all the machinery that we have today that you take for granted. And the noise is so loud, especially in the city. And a visitor would be like, good heavens, how can you hear anything with all this noise? Considering the possibility it was a much quieter time back in 1600. If that's true, 500 years ago, what will it be like 500 years from now? This is very interesting types of questions, right? 3A, obviously, as well, or another text that I want you to write down, Plato's classic, the Phaedo, P-H-A-E-D-O, where Socrates, right before he drinks his hemlock and dies, muses about death and dying. He makes the argument that one shouldn't fear death because it's unknown. Just because it's unknown shouldn't make it a scary proposition. We'll study that text in our senior year together. Finally, at 3B, this is the question. If you could go forward or backwards in time, would you? Knowing full well that it might change you and it might change the world that you live in. Well, there you go, an introduction. We'll turn now to our first short story of unit number 2 and enjoy.